The sun had barely begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban street. The air smelled faintly of fresh rain, and the world seemed to slow down for a moment, as if it were holding its breath. Three boys stood on the corner, their sneakers scuffing the pavement, eyes scanning the street. They were the kind of boys who were always a little out of place, the kind who moved in and out of the background of life, unnoticed but always watching. Today was like any other, or so they thought. "Yo, check it out," said Jamal, the oldest of the three, his voice low but urgent. Car broke down. The other two, Marcus and Elijah, turned their heads toward the sound of tires scraping against asphalt. A sleek black SUV had pulled to a stop just a few feet away. The driver, a man in a sharp suit, looked frustrated, his hands gripping the steering wheel as if he were trying to force the car to move. It was clear the tire was flat. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The man, with his perfectly tailored clothes and polished shoes, had no idea that these three boys, wearing faded t-shirts, jeans with holes in the knees, and worn-out sneakers, were the ones who could help him. Jamal raised an eyebrow, a mischievous smile playing on his lips. "You think he's gonna ask us for help?" Marcus snorted. "Doubt it. He probably thinks we can't even afford a car, let alone fix one." Elijah, the quietest of the group, watched the scene unfold. He wasn't so sure. There was something about the man's face, an expression of helplessness that mirrored his own sometimes. It was a look he had seen in the mirror, the look of someone who had nowhere else to turn. Without thinking, Elijah began to walk toward the SUV. "Let's help him," he said, his voice steady but with an underlying tone of uncertainty. Jamal and Marcus exchanged a glance, but shrugged and followed. The man was still sitting in the driver's seat when they reached the car. His window was rolled down, and as he looked up, his eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't expected to see three kids standing there offering help. "Can we help you with the tire?" Elijah asked, his voice kind but firm. The man hesitated for a moment, then let out a sigh. I'm not sure. I don't even know if you kids know how to change a tire." Jamal stepped forward, the older brother in him taking charge. "We've done it before, sir. No problem." The man looked at them skeptically, then glanced down at the flat tire. He seemed to weigh his options: stay stuck in the car, waiting for a tow truck, or trust these kids who, by all appearances, didn't seem like they had much to their names. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to try," he muttered, his voice tinged with frustration. With a few quick instructions, Jamal and Elijah worked together, using the spare tire and tools they had borrowed from a nearby garage. The man sat in the driver's seat, watching them work, his arms folded across his chest. As the minutes passed, something changed. The boys weren't just fixing the tire, they were slowly unraveling something inside of him. He had been so wrapped up in his world, in his status and wealth, that he had forgotten the simple joys of human connection. He had forgotten what it felt like to rely on others, especially those he might never have given a second glance. As Jamal tightened the final lug nut on the tire, the man finally spoke again, his tone softer now. "You know, I'm sorry for doubting you guys," he said, leaning out the window. "You've really saved me here." The boys exchanged looks, unsure how to respond. They didn't expect praise, after all. They were just doing what anyone would do. But the man's gratitude was genuine, and for the first time in a long while, the three boys felt something they hadn't in a while. Respect. "You don't have to thank us, sir," Jamal said, his voice steady. "We're just doing what's right." The man nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "What's your name?" he asked, looking at each of them in turn. "Jamal," said the oldest, his arms still resting on the tire iron. "Marcus," the second boy said with a nod. "Elijah," the quiet one added, his eyes meeting the man's gaze for the first time. "I'm Eric," the man replied. I'm I'm not used to people helping me out like this. He chuckled, a little embarrassed. I guess I've been a little too caught up in my own world. No problem, Jamal said, standing up and brushing his hands off. It's no big deal. Eric looked at them, his gaze lingering for a moment, longer than usual. What's your plan for today? You all seem like you're heading somewhere. Jamal exchanged a quick look with Marcus and Elijah. Just out and about, Jamal said vaguely. Nothing special. Eric nodded, his gaze drifting to the street ahead. Well, I can't leave without doing something for you guys. Why don't I take you out for lunch? I know a place. Best burger in town. The offer hung in the air for a moment. The boys hesitated, unsure. Lunch with a stranger? But something about Eric's tone seemed genuine, and besides, it wasn't every day someone like him offered to treat them. All right, Jamal said finally, we're in. I'll continue the next part if you're satisfied with this direction. Let me know if you want any adjustments. As they climbed into the back seat of Eric's SUV, a strange sense of unease settled over the boys. It wasn't the car, which was smoother than anything they had ever ridden in, nor was it the man's politeness. It was the fact that this was so unlike anything they had ever experienced. A billionaire offering them lunch? It didn't make sense. The drive to the restaurant was short but filled with an awkward silence. Eric, the man who had seemed so confident just an hour ago, now seemed distracted. His eyes were focused on the road ahead, but there was something in the way he gripped the steering wheel, something that suggested he wasn't entirely present. Elijah, ever the observant one, noticed this immediately. He kept his eyes on Eric, studying his movements. The man didn't seem like the type to get nervous, but there was an air of discomfort about him now, a tension that hadn't been there when the tire was flat. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. So, Eric, he began, his voice slightly unsure. How come you were out here on this side of town? I mean, no offense, but it's kinda different from where you'd expect to see someone like you. Eric glanced in the rearview mirror at Marcus, his expression flickering for a moment before he looked back at the road. Yeah, he said slowly. I guess I don't belong here much. But sometimes I like the quiet. The things people take for granted. You. No? The boys exchanged confused looks. What did he mean by that? The things people take for granted. Was he talking about his wealth or something else? The silence settled again, and the car pulled into a small diner at the edge of town. It was one of those places you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. Weathered brick, neon signs flickering above. A place that felt frozen in time. Not the type of place you'd expect to see a man like Eric. He parked the SUV and turned off the engine, then looked back at the boys with a small, almost apologetic smile. You guys hungry? I know it's not the fancy stuff, but this place has the best burgers in town. They've got a kind of charm about them. They got out of the car, and the cool evening air hit them like a sudden wave. The boys hesitated for a moment before following Eric into the diner. As they stepped inside, the smell of sizzling meat and fries filled the air, and the atmosphere was warm and comforting. It was like stepping into another world, a world that felt both familiar and foreign at the same time. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with a tired smile, greeted them immediately. Eric gave her a quick nod, and she led them to a booth in the back. As they sat down, the boys couldn't help but notice the way Eric interacted with her. There was a softness in his voice, a kind of familiarity that suggested he had been here before. But it wasn't the kind of place a billionaire would frequent regularly. So, Jamal began, breaking the silence as they all sat down. What's the deal, Eric? I mean, you said you liked this place, but what's really going on? Eric sighed and leaned back in his seat, staring out the window for a moment. He seemed lost in thought, his fingers tapping against the edge of the table. You know, Eric began slowly, people think that because you've got money, everything is easy. that everything is just handed to you, but it's not like that. At all. Money can give you a lot of things, luxury, status, comfort, but it doesn't give you peace. It doesn't give you happiness. The boys were quiet as Eric's words hung in the air. They weren't expecting this kind of honesty. People with money didn't usually open up about how hard their lives were. They just flaunted what they had. But Eric wasn't doing that. He was sharing something deeper, something the boys could feel but not entirely understand. I've made a lot of mistakes, Eric continued, his voice lowering. I've hurt people I loved, and now I'm trying to fix things, but it's harder than I thought. Jamal, always the one to push for answers, leaned forward. Fix what exactly? Eric's eyes flickered with emotion, a sadness that the boys hadn't seen in him before. He opened his mouth to speak, but was interrupted by the waitress bringing over a tray of burgers and fries. She set the food down in front of them with a cheerful smile, but the moment was fleeting, and as soon as she left, the air grew heavy again. I'll tell you, Eric said after a moment, but not here. Not yet. His voice was quiet, almost, as if he were afraid someone would overhear. The boys exchanged puzzled glances. What was he talking about? What did he need to fix? And why hadn't he told them the full story? For the rest of the meal, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Eric asked about their lives, where they went to school, what they liked to do. The boys answered politely, but their minds were elsewhere. They couldn't stop thinking about what Eric had said. He was rich. He had everything anyone could want, yet he seemed miserable. What was going on with him? After they finished eating, Eric paid the bill, and they walked back to the SUV. The air had grown colder, and the streets were quieter now, the hum of the city fading away as night settled in. Eric didn't speak as he drove, but the boys could feel the tension growing again. Whatever it wasn't over. There was something he wasn't saying, something dark hanging over him like a shadow. As they neared the street where the boys lived, Eric slowed the SUV to a stop. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, his voice soft. I didn't mean to drop all that on you. I don't know who else to talk to. I've been so isolated. My world is so small, and I didn't realize how much I've been missing. The boys were silent, not knowing how to respond. It wasn't every day that a billionaire opened up like this, but there was something else in Eric's voice now, something that felt like desperation. We've got your back, man, Jamal said. After a moment, his voice steady. Whatever it is, we're here to listen. Eric's gaze flickered to Jamal, and for the first time that evening, he looked truly vulnerable. You don't even know what you're getting into, he said, almost to himself. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. And as the SUV turned the corner and came to a stop in front of their house, the boys couldn't shake the feeling that they had just stepped into something much bigger than they could have ever imagined. As the SUV pulled to a stop in front of the boys' modest home, the street seemed quieter than usual. The usual hum of activity, the sound of passing cars, children playing, neighbors chatting, was absent, as if the world itself was waiting for something. Something important. Eric turned off the ignition and sat in silence for a few moments. The boys, who had been unusually quiet during the ride home, exchanged glances, their faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The night had been strange from the start. What started as a simple encounter with a flat tire had spiraled into something far more complicated. The question now was, what was Eric really hiding? Well, this is it, Jamal said, breaking the silence. He gestured vaguely to the small house behind them, the faded brickwork and cracked sidewalk that marked the corner of their neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was home. Eric looked out of the window, taking in the scene with an unreadable expression. He didn't say anything for a long while, just sat there, looking at the house, as if it held some kind of mystery all its own. This Is where you live? Eric asked quietly, his voice distant. Yeah, it's not much, Marcus said, his tone defensive but also resigned. He'd grown used to people looking down on their neighborhood, especially when they came from the kind of wealth Eric had. Eric's gaze remained fixed on the house. It's real, he said softly. It's not what I expected. For a moment the boys were confused. What had Eric expected? They couldn't figure it out. But before they could ask, Eric shook his head slightly, as if snapping himself out of some kind of reverie. Listen, he said, his voice now more intense. I need to tell you something. It's important. The boys turned their full attention to him. There was a sharp edge to his tone now, something that hinted at urgency, a need to reveal something he had been holding inside for too long. You said you were trying to fix something, Elijah said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. What are you trying to fix, Eric? Eric's hands clenched around the steering wheel. I've made some mistakes. Big mistakes, he said, his voice heavy with guilt. I've hurt people I cared about, people I shouldn't have taken. For granted, Jamal raised an eyebrow. What kind of mistakes? Eric exhaled slowly, as if gathering the strength to tell them. The kind that you can't undo, he said, his voice barely audible. I made decisions that changed lives, people's lives. And now I have to live with the consequences. The silence in the car deepened. The boys could feel the weight of Eric's words, and they couldn't help but wonder what kind of decisions would lead someone to speak like this. What had he done? What was he hiding? I've been running from this for years, Eric continued, his voice trembling now. I've been trying to fix everything, but the more I try, the worse it gets. It's like the mistakes keep piling up, and no matter what I do, I can't escape them. The boys were on the edge of their seats now, their hearts pounding in, their chests. Whatever Eric had done, it was clearly something he regretted deeply, something that was eating him alive. But what could it be? Elijah, Eric said suddenly, turning his gaze to the quietest of the three boys. You're different from the others. You don't speak much, but you see things, you understand things. Elijah was taken aback by the comment. He wasn't sure how to respond. He didn't think he was any different from Jamal or Marcus, but something about Eric's words struck a chord with him. It was as if Eric had singled him out for a reason. Why do you say that? Elijah asked cautiously. Eric leaned forward, his eyes intense, almost desperate. Because you're the only one who hasn't asked me what I've done. You're the only one who hasn't pushed me for answers. And that tells me something. It tells me you get it. You understand what it's like to be trapped. Elijah felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't know how to respond, but the words seemed to hang in the air, echoing in his mind. What was Eric trying to say? What was he really asking? There was a long pause before Eric spoke again. I need your help, he said quietly, almost pleading. I've been running from this for too long. I don't know who else to turn to, but something's going to happen, something big, and I need you to be ready. Jamal frowned, his brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean, something big? What's going to happen? Eric's eyes darkened. I can't explain it all right now, but I'll show you soon. You'll see what I mean. The tension in the air was palpable. The boys exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to make of Eric's cryptic words. What was he really asking of them? They had only just met him, and now he was asking for their help in something that seemed dangerous. We can't just jump into this, Marcus said, his voice firm. We don't even know you. You're talking about some big thing, but you won't tell us what it is. How are we supposed to help? Eric looked at them, his face a mixture of frustration and desperation. I know it's a lot to ask, but I promise you, if you don't help me, things are going to get worse. And I don't want to drag you into this, but if you don't, you'll be caught in the middle of it anyway. The boys were silent, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. They didn't know what to do. They were just three kids trying to get by, trying to make it through another day. And now they were being asked to step into a world they didn't understand, a world filled with danger and mystery. After a long moment, Jamal spoke up. "We're not getting involved in anything crazy, but if you want us to help, you need to tell us everything. No more secrets." Eric nodded slowly, his face a mask of exhaustion. "I'll tell you everything, I promise." The boys didn't know it yet, but this conversation would mark the beginning of something that would change their lives forever. They had stepped into a world they didn't fully understand, a world filled with secrets, lies, and a danger they couldn't even begin to comprehend. But for better or for worse, they were already in it, and there was no turning back. The next morning, the boys couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The events of the previous night had settled into their minds like a shadow they couldn't escape. As they sat around the breakfast table, picking at their cereal, the weight of Eric's words lingered in the air. Something big was coming. But what did that mean? What was Eric truly involved in? And why had he come to them? Elijah couldn't stop thinking about what Eric had said. "I need your help. If you don't, things are going to get worse." The more he thought about it, the more those words gnawed at him. They didn't make sense, not in the way they were used to things making sense. But nothing about this situation had been ordinary. From the moment they helped Eric with that tire, their lives had taken a turn into a world of uncertainty. Jamal, as usual, was more vocal about his concerns. He slammed his cereal bowl down on the table, making a loud clink as the spoon rattled against the edge. "We need to talk to Eric. We can't just sit around and wonder what's going on. We need answers, man." "I agree," Marcus said, looking up from his phone for the first time that morning. "This is getting too weird. We're not in the business of fixing other people's problems, especially when they don't tell us what's really going on." Elijah was quieter, staring into his bowl. He didn't have an answer to any of it, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Eric's plea wasn't something they could easily ignore. He looked up at his friends. "What if we can help him? What if it's something we can't even imagine? We don't know what he's going through, but if he's asking for our help, maybe we should listen." Jamal snorted, shaking his head. "Help him with what? Fixing his life? Look, man, we don't even know him. He's a rich guy who turned up out of nowhere. Maybe there's a reason he came to us, but I'm telling you, we're not getting involved in some millionaire's mess." "I'm with Jamal," Marcus said. "This is bigger than us. We don't even know what we're getting into." Elijah's eyes narrowed. "But what if it's something bigger than we realize? What if the reason he came to us isn't just random? Maybe there's more to this than we think." The three of them sat in silence for a few moments, the gravity of the conversation sinking in. None of them had the answers, but the thought of leaving it all behind was starting to feel like the easy way out, and deep down, Elijah knew that wasn't an option. Later that day, they decided to meet Eric at a local cafe. They weren't sure what they were expecting, an explanation perhaps, or even an apology, but they knew they had to find out more. The cafe was quiet when they arrived, a small, cozy place tucked away on the corner of a busy street. Eric was already sitting at a table by the window, his face obscured by the dark sunglasses he wore, even though it was overcast. As they approached, he looked up, his eyes betraying a level of exhaustion they hadn't seen the night before. The confident man they had met on the side of the road seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone who was carrying a weight they couldn't see, but could certainly feel. "Hey!" Eric greeted them with a forced smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Glad you could make it." The boys sat down without a word, each of them studying Eric closely, wondering what he was hiding. There was something about him, something that didn't fit, the way he had come into their lives so suddenly, the way he seemed almost desperate. But they still didn't understand the full story. "So," Jamal began, his voice cautious but firm, "you said last night that we could help you, but you didn't really tell us what's going on. What's the deal, Eric?" Eric sighed, rubbing his temples as if trying to stave off a headache. "I wasn't sure how to tell you. Hell, I'm not sure I'm ready to tell you, but I don't have a choice now. You've already been pulled into this, whether you realize it or not." Elijah leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Pulled into what?" Eric glanced around the cafe, as if checking for eavesdroppers, then leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I'm in trouble. Serious trouble." The boys exchanged confused looks. "What kind of trouble?" Marcus asked, his tone laced with skepticism. "You said last night that you were trying to fix something, but you're not exactly telling us what." Eric hesitated, his gaze flickering to the window before he spoke again. "I'm being targeted, and it's not just me, it's my family, my life. There are people who want to destroy everything I've built, and I don't know who to trust anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy and thick. The boys stared at Eric, not sure how to respond. This wasn't the man they had helped with a flat tire. This was someone entirely different. A man who was broken, desperate, and most chilling of all, fearful. "Who's after you?" Elijah asked, his voice low. Eric's jaw tightened. "It's complicated, but there are people, dangerous people. They don't care who they hurt. They've been trying to get to me for years, and now they're getting closer. I can feel it. I've tried everything I can to stop them, but it's never enough." Jamal sat back in his chair, his arms crossed. "So what does that have to do with us?" Eric's eyes met theirs, his expression serious. "I'm being followed, watched, and I think they've found a way to get to me through the people I care about. And I think I've just put you in their crosshairs, you three." His voice dropped even lower. "I don't want to drag you into this, but I don't know how much time I have left. The people I'm dealing with, they won't stop until they get what they want." A chill ran through the boys. For the first time, they began to understand the severity of what they had stumbled into. This wasn't about a flat tire anymore. This wasn't about helping a man in need. This was about survival, about being caught in the middle of a dangerous game they didn't even know they were playing. "What do you want us to do?" Marcus asked, his voice quieter now. There was no bravado in his words, just fear. Eric took a deep breath and stared at each of them in turn. "I need you to keep your eyes open. Watch for anything strange, anything that doesn't add up. If you see something, say something. But most importantly, don't trust anyone, not even me." The weight of his words settled over them like a heavy blanket. They had walked into something far bigger than they could have imagined. And worst part? They didn't know who to trust anymore, not even Eric. As the conversation continued, Eric slowly started to reveal more about his past, the mistakes he had made, the people he had wronged, and the threats that had followed him over the years. But the deeper they delved into his story, the more questions arose. Was Eric telling the truth? Could they trust him? And even if they did, what could they do to help him? The more they listened, the more they realized just how tangled the web of lies and deceit was. And no matter how much they wanted to help, they couldn't escape the fact that they were now part of a dangerous game. One where the stakes were far higher than they could have ever imagined. The end.